Welcome, friends. Thanks for joining Dave and I again. Um, Today, we're going to go a little bit off script. Instead of reading from the book, I thought might be nice to get Dave's perspective on, when Rohr gets into quoting the Bible, referencing things that are religious. Well, I know some members of this group are not religious, and they may kind of go, well, I don't know if can appreciate this angle, this perspective that Richard Rohr has in the book. And Dave, being many things, including a pastor, has perspective that's a little different than other pastors and such on this topic. So I thought we'd talk just a little bit, 10, 15 minutes about this, and hopefully it'll be helpful for anyone who's challenged with Richard Rohr's reference to religious things. Sound good?
Sounds fine to me.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's helpful for the fact that I've been listening to Dave talk for a long time, over 10 years. So I'm well aware of how he sees it. And again, I think Dave's perspective may be helpful for others as well. So I guess we'll just kind of start off with that common phrase. People saying, I'm spiritual, not religious. I'm sure you've heard that many times, being a counselor, as well as a pastor and such. If somebody was to say, well, I'll just say it. Dave, what does spiritual, not religious mean to you?
Well, what it means to me and what it means to the person who's saying it, I guess it probably is going to be about the same thing. I mean, what we're talking about is someone who has been disillusioned by, turned off by the institution of organized religion. And that's an easy thing to be turned off by. And the reason is that any institution is basically a company. It's an organization, it's a corporation, if you want to look at it that way. And it has all the aspects of what a corporation needs to have. It's kind of a living, breathing thing that has to eat and grow and live and be fed and all these things. And so it has to do the things that corporations do. And as such, and here's the interesting thing, as such, these institutions tend to be first half of life entities. They exist in a first half of life environment where everything has to be performance-based, everything has to be merit-based. We have a group of people rather than individuals, so there has to be rules and laws to hold the group together. There has to be belief systems, there has to be creeds, there has to be this and this and this, in order for the group to have identity that allows it to survive as itself. Otherwise, if it doesn't have those things, then it falls apart. And so it absolutely needs to have all those bits and pieces, which means that it's going to be completely at odds with and in conflict with the contemplative way that we've been talking. I guess we haven't been talking about the contemplative way as much, but this way of approaching our spirituality from an experiential point of view rather than an intellectual point of view. So what the institution of a religion is going to do is going to have a concept about God, a concept about spirituality, a concept about the way that this is played out in the community. And people need to adhere to that, or they can't be part of the club, they can't be part of the group. And then if it's exclusive, the way Christianity and Islam has been, then they are right and everybody else is wrong. And that runs afoul of all sorts of things. But what we're talking about in terms of contemplative practice is that now we're going to approach God experientially, and we're not going to try to lock him into an intellectual box. We're not going to have a creed formed around him. We're going to experience what that presence is all about. That's a second half of life spirituality, where we are moving into a non-performance-based, non-merit-based, and non-intellectual-based approach to God. It's going to be experiential. And so that's at odds with this institution. The interesting thing about all of this is that we do need religion. We as people need religion, but we need a healthy religion. And a healthy religion is going to have to balance these two things, because it has to be a group, which means it has to have rules and it has to have something that identifies the group. But that has to be held onto lightly enough and understand that these are mere placeholders. They aren't actually describing the Godhead. They aren't actually describing that which can't be described by definition because it's spiritual and exists outside of physical laws. But it points us toward and is a funnel that allows us to move toward. It's encouraging us toward, teaching us how to have this experience of God in a second half of life sense. And Rohr points out, I think in this book as well, that the original meaning of religion from the Latin is religio. Re means again, ligio means to bind or connect together. And so what religion in terms of rebinding or rejoining is about is rejoining the two halves of us, both physical and spiritual. Maybe rejoining the two halves of life, first half and second half. Because even as we move spiritually into a second half of life understanding, we still have to live in this world. We still have to perform. We still have to grow. We still have to feed and all those sorts of things. But to bind those back together again into a unitive whole, to stop seeing the world in terms of duality, this and that, light and dark, right and wrong, all of these sorts of things, and bring them back together again. When religion is done right, even within the limits of being an institution and an organization, that's absolutely necessary. And then one final comment on religion is that the whole point of us going through this spiritual exercise is to learn how to relate, to learn how to love, to learn how to connect with each other, because that's our basic purpose for being here, is connection. And how do we do that if we're not in some sort of community? And so religion is also providing us the community within which to work out this spiritual learning that we're doing, this enlightenment, and ultimately this love. But it's so easy to understand why people get turned off to the institution, because we get lost in the institution. At a certain point, we think that the institution is the be-all and end-all of everything. The creed is everything, believing is everything, and we are right and everyone else is wrong. And all the religious wars that we've had, and all the abuse, and all the bias, and all the excommunication, everything that happens when we get unbalanced to the side of the institution is obviously completely at odds with what we're trying to do spiritually.
Well said. Yeah, see, that's why this guy gets invited to do these things. A unique insight to these things, and frankly, I don't know anyone who can express it as well. So I guess part two of the question is, okay, so folks, again, as I mentioned earlier, Dave's a pastor. The church that he teaches at is called The Effect in San Juan Capistrano. I've got links into the recordings of studies, by the way, if you're interested in hearing a larger group dynamic discussion on the book. There's a link that, gosh, it seems like an infinite amount of recordings, because the book study's been going on for, 10 months. And it will be resuming next week. It'll be resuming in January if you'll want to join us on Wednesdays for a live discussion. Obviously, we're getting to the tail end of the book. But again, it's dynamic. You may not have read any of the chapters ahead of time, but that doesn't mean being involved with the discussion on this won't be beneficial for yourself and the group. Mm-hmm. We invite you to come in. I think it might be nice to have a fresh perspective or two in the book study on Wednesdays. And that's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'll put the link in there. So anyway, all that leads to what you just described. I have seen demonstrated at The Effect. But obviously, the people that are listening to this probably haven't. So how does this look like in real life at The Effect, where it's more contemplative, it's more experiential than intellectual, Dave?
Well, we are still working within Christianity in the sense that we are followers of Jesus and Jesus' way. But once again, to realize that any theology is just that placeholder that we were talking about. None of us can have a absolutely accurate theology. It's physically impossible. We're talking about something by definition that, again, stands outside the laws of physics, stands outside of logic, stands outside of language. So what we're doing is creating a metaphorical language and trying to describe the experience, at least, of what we have experienced of God's presence, of what we experienced about the relationship that we have with the unseen. You know, if we believe that there is more to the world than what we can see and taste and smell and measure with our instruments, what's our relationship with that we call spirit, that we call ultimately God? What's our relationship with each other? What's the part of ourselves that is unseen, that makes us more than just mere physical beings? And so as we relate to that, we realize that our theology is trying to describe that in a way that gives us a paradigm. It gives us a way to be able to move forward in life, being able to do two things: to accept life on life's terms, even when it's really difficult, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but accept what is presented to us in the moment and still live with a sense of hope and gratitude. If we can do those two things, then we are successfully negotiating life. That allows us to actually take that psychological journey that we absolutely need in order to be emotionally regulated, to be aware and to be present in the moment, to make choices that allow us to benefit most of the people that are going to be affected by our decisions in any given moment. And that psychological journey is part of this transition from first to second half of life, to be able to deal with our core beliefs, those beliefs that were put into us even in childhood, what Thomas Keating calls programs for happiness and programs for survival. So everybody grew up in a dysfunctional family to a certain degree, right? And so all those dysfunctions caused us to have to put things in place that allowed us to survive. And those become these core beliefs that follow us along through life, because just when the circumstances of childhood change, it doesn't mean that the programs are going to go offline automatically because they're not needed anymore. No, those have become deep-seated ideas that we have about ourselves, about the relationship that we have with others and life, and that colors our thought processes and our behavior patterns all throughout life. To become aware of those and how they are working unconsciously, and to be able to dissipate those, to actually learn new ways of behaving, new ways of thinking. This is all very psychological, and it is tied up in the metaphorical way that we speak theologically and scripturally. So for people that may be watching this in your group, that are maybe they're being triggered by some of the religious references and the scriptural references that Rohr uses, to realize that Rohr also has this outlook. He understands that scripture is metaphor. It has to be. It's the only way that we can speak about God. And some of the damage that we've done to scripture and the image of religion in many secular minds is that we look at it as if it were literal. It wasn't meant to be literal. And yes, there are books in the Bible that are certainly historical or more historical, and we can look at those as being more literal than certainly Genesis or the prophetic books or apocalyptic books. We understand that those have to be metaphorical. And so Rohr is using scripture in that way. He'll use it in the same way that he's using the story of Odysseus. He's looking at the truth that is being conveyed through the story, rather than trying to affirm the literal accuracy of any one of these stories. So as he quotes anything, look for the deeper understanding of the psychological and deep spiritual truths that are supposed to be conveyed by those stories, and you'll get a better understanding of what he's trying to accomplish. Obviously, he's a Franciscan, he's a Catholic, but he makes pains to say that when he's had to choose between the Roman and the Catholic, and Catholic literally means universal, he says he falls to the Catholic side, the universal side, rather than the Roman side, which is defining the institution. And so he's looking at his religion and his understanding and his theology from a much wider base. And if you can embrace that, then it kind of transcends these more parochial limitations and maybe limitations. And did I say limitations twice? And so just if you can understand it that way, hopefully you can get down and drill down to the truth of what he's trying to get at and not get stuck anywhere in between. And realize that what we're doing is a full psychological and spiritual transformation. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's a beautiful way of understanding the journey. It's not the only way, but it's one way. And remember, first and second half of life ideas come from Carl Jung. and he wasn't, he was a very, he stood outside of Christianity, let's say. You know, he could refer back to it, but he understood it in the kind of the way we're talking about right now, in a much expanded sense. But he was coming from a psychological point of view, recognizing these two halves of life. And so there's a great merging here of a lot of disciplines that are creating this thread. And I hope that your listeners can find that piece and not get stuck with some of the religious or scriptural references that are going on here.
Yes, and I can say by attending physically or online with Dave's teachings on Sundays, or book studies on Wednesdays, or just there's a discussion group on Tuesdays that allows people to converse about what was presented in his talk on Sundays. All of that is what he's just described. I may say that, at least from my seat, I see what Dave's presenting to the congregation is being as much, if not more, psychological, philosophical than it is theological. Very much what he's referencing as Rohr is also how Dave is presenting this as well. It's a framework. Is that right, Dave?
Yes, yes. Marcus Borg had a great line, because as soon as you reference the Bible as metaphor or myth, the knives come out, right? In many more literal or fundamental groups, and they think that you're trying to dismiss or undermine the Bible. Marcus Borg, who was a Christian theologian, he said, myth is the story of things that never were, but always are. And just think about that for a second. Myth is a story of the way things never were, but always are. Myth is using metaphorical stories and language to get to these perennial truths, these truths that are always the same for all of us throughout culture and time. And so if you go into comparative religions, you realize these truths are there. I'm a follower of Jesus, and unabashedly so, from this perennial point of view, because Jesus teaches a wisdom that I think is more inclusive of all these truths than I've seen in other religions, and maybe just culturally because I grew up within it, I'm more comfortable with it. Okay, but that doesn't mean that I don't see truth coming from other religions, but they all tend to be the same truth, which makes sense because there is one truth, right? And so when we have this experience from whatever cultural framework we come from, we're seeing the same thing. And we're seeing things that always are. The stories that never were, that we're telling about them, is how we are, again, gearing ourselves toward, funneling ourselves toward this universal experience that is the second half of life experience that we're talking about, is the spiritual enlightenment, if you will. It's nirvana in Buddhism, and it's heaven in Christianity, but not heaven of the afterlife. It's heaven of the experience of kingdom that we can have right here and right now, which is what Jesus was talking about. When he talks about kingdom, he's not talking about heaven of the next life. He's talking about the experience we can have right now when we become aware enough to be able, those two things, right? Accept life and live with hope and gratitude, but also to be able to make choices that are connective, that bring us all together, that religio, right? Rejoin and rebind all these experiences into one thing. And that's where we're trying to get. And so that's what the effect is all about. That's what we're trying to understand Jesus from this first century Hebrew point of view that brings these all back together again, and kind of end run 1700 years of Western Christian theology, which has taken us off point. And then to realize that even within even a small institution like the Effect, I mean, we still have to have all those things we talked about, but to balance those as best as we can, to flatten the org chart, to realize that we are only distinguished by our roles, but not in any hierarchical way. We're all in the boat paddling together, and that concept has helped us for 15 years to retain that kind of community as best as we can. I think we've done a pretty good job, and because we're small, we're able to do that. Large institutions have a very difficult time, if they're not an impossible task, of trying to maintain that kind of connection within the membership. But that's what we're all about.
Yep, I can attest to that. And in closing, you said something that has got my interest and may have gotten someone else's interest. You said, regardless of the religious tradition, there is one truth. So could you let us in on what your perspective of that one truth is?
Well, I mean, from a monotheistic point of view, there's only one God. There is only one first cause. There is only one, if you believe theistically that there is an intelligence behind all of this, that something designed it, created it, rather than it just randomly occurring, then that one thing is the one truth. Now, what is that truth? I remember doing a thought experiment when I was first moving into this type of thinking as a Christian. It's like, okay, what can I know absolutely objectively is true outside of my own experience, outside of my own subjectivity? And I kept ticking off all of the essentials of Christianity and everything that I thought I could do. When I got to the bottom of that dog pile, what I realized is the only thing that I believed I could know absolutely is that connection is better than disconnection, that unity is better than disunity. Well, interestingly enough, the ancient Hebrews named their God unity. What Elohim means, what Elaha means is oneness, unity. And so this idea that unity is this universal truth, that we and everything we see is really one thing. It's all one. And this love that we speak of, when the scriptures say God is love, God is this complete identification with the other in such a way that they become one. That is the universal truth that I think every human being is rubbing up against in their lives. Whether they are ever able to break through the necessary duality of our conscious mind, our egoic mind, that sees things in terms of contrasts, that takes things apart and puts them into different categorical pigeonholes in order to be able to survive better, to be able to have quick recall and reflexes and so on and so forth. Whether that person is able to break from that first half of life point of view, the dualities, into a second half of life, the unity, that is the actual objective truth of life as I see it. And the unitive truth that we see, whether you're looking at Taoism or Buddhism, whether you're looking at Islam or Judaism or Christianity, there is that unity, that universal truth at the core. And it's expressed different ways, but really that's what we're talking about. And that's what I'm talking about. It's that anything that is universal to all people is going to exist very deeply underneath the cultural expressions of that truth. And that's what we're trying to recognize.
Thank you for explaining that. And I want to continue on with this, but I want to also keep this short and concise and keep people's interest and stuff. Maybe we'll pick up on that next time.
We could do that.
Yeah. So again, that's the other thing, folks, is if you're enjoying this, Dave and I are going to have a lot of conversations that are recorded and shared with you and such. Yeah, that'll be really cool. Because again, Dave has affected my life in such a positive way that this is kind of me paying it forward, letting other people that, I don't know, this is kind of scratching an itch. It might be interesting enough to you to, at least listen, give a few moments of your time. I'd like, again, to share what's been presented to me by Dave in these thought exercises. So that's the other thing that's, for myself, I found very attractive with what is at the effect. The community is very much about free thinking. In fact, Dave and I have kind of joked about it being faith for free thinkers. but these thought exercises, Dave, one of his sayings that really resonated to me that I thought was good enough for me to come back and listen to some more, what was, if he's saying something that everybody in the room is agreeing with, only one person in the room is thinking for themselves. So this is very much a community that's about people going, okay, what about this? Or, of having open dialogues that I haven't found in any other, faith-based community. It is quite all right for you to come into the space of the effect and say, I don't believe in God, or what about the Crusades? What if there is, all those existential questions or all those sticking points that I had before I ever, was interested in, regularly listening to these paradigms and considering them, how they apply to myself. That's the thing that I probably would say again to yourself. If you believe that there is something greater than yourself, but also you think it's beyond the box that most churches put it in, you may appreciate what Dave shares on Sundays as much as I do, or you may want to have an active dialogue on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights as well. It's quite refreshing, and it's quite bigger than just Dave. That's the other thing as well. Dave happens to be the guy that's on the stage on Sundays doing his talk, but a lot of the learning, 99% of the learning's done in community. And frankly, again, it's not always about us agreeing. And I like that. It's a safe place to be different. So if that's something that you would like to be involved with, again, come and check us out. All right. With that being said, Dave, thank you so much. We will talk again soon.
Always a pleasure, buddy.
All right. Till then, may peace be with you all.